Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is another of the meetups in our Tao Teh Ching series. And I am just honored to have Fraklin here to talk about his experience with this philosophy. Okay. The format is, first I'm going to talk to Fraklin, just ask him about his story, his encounter with Tao Teh Ching. And then we're going to do breakout rooms, after which we are going to come back and you can ask any questions to Fraklin. Now, during the first time, when I'm asking questions, you're welcome to put any questions in the chat. I've asked Fraklin not to look at the chat, so he's not going to respond to chat because we want the spoken word to have a kind of integrity. And whatever questions I think can be integrated very well with the initial part, I will go ahead and do that. And whatever questions we can't, you're welcome to ask them, discuss them during the breakout rooms and then ask them to Fraklin when we come back. All right, so that's the format. So let's get started. Welcome, Fraklin. So I don't know where to start. So this is very exciting. So tell me a little bit about your background and your interest in philosophy, in trying to figure out about consciousness before you encountered Tao Te Ching.
When the Beatles went to the Maharishi in 1966, 67, I was about 9 years old, and I became interested in Eastern meditation and this idea of a state of meditation that was some, fabulous transcendental idea. So, I started doing, not formally, but in my own childlike mimicry, started meditating and doing yoga. And then my brother at 16 years old decided, when I was 13 in 1971, decided it was time for me to start a path of knowledge and introduced me to smoking hashish. And I had the experience in the imaginal realm, quite traumatic, really. But that sort of was the lure that, hey, there's this whole other state of imagination that's like dreaming wide awake. But to come back to the Tao Te Ching, around 1970, they started showing Charlie Chan movies, these old Charlie Chan reruns, right? So here was this Taoist philosopher detective in these film noir classics, great characters, really entertaining. And I was just, this was like my favorite thing, was watching Charlie Chan movies, and for the whole, the whole artistry of it and the philosophy of it. Then in 1972, I think, the Kung Fu series started with David Carradine, the Kung Fu master, going through the West, trying to be pacifist, but like meting out justice with his martial arts. That really made a deep impression on me. And so I took a deep dive into metaphysics through Carlos Castaneda. I became a profound J.R.R. Tolkien fan, obsessed with it. In fact, prior to Tolkien, I was reading Le Morte d'Arthur, the Arthurian legends. Mm-hmm. And it was, and that was the first very serious self-directed journey into the other world, where I had a full-on vision. Saw a pond with a sun setting and sank under the pond into an underground realm of where the trees were stones holding up the earth, and way down these miles of passages of these tree-like pillars were knights in living colors having these tensions. I was in the archetypal world. Well, that was really the lure that catches one in the perilous realm, and you're trying to go back to have a vision, but that's not the Tao. But I went down that rabbit hole, and it was 1977. It may have been here, one more piece. In 1975, while visiting the Chautauqua Institution, which is about 80 miles south of Buffalo, was getting on the bus to return home, and I wanted a book, and I went into the bookstore and saw something called The Oldest Book in the World, and it was James Legg's I Ching. And on the way back, I'm reading this book, laughing at these odd, curious little aphorisms, these strange little sentences, these archetypal images. I had no idea what it was about, but it made me laugh. But I was intrigued because it was the oldest book in the world. So that was that. And then in 1976 or 77, I believe it was 77, while I was in the deepest throes of the initiation, where one is swallowed by the other world. One is living in the imagination, and one's touch with the world of our senses and the world of our community, and all of that becomes secondary to this kind of obsession of the imagination and the spirit with archetypal, fantastical inflations and encounters with, delusions and all kinds of things. But my neighbor happened to have a copy of the Tao Teh Ching. So when I opened the Tao Teh, and it was this version of it by Jiafu Fang in English.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was like finding a treasure. It was, poetic and wise and very accessible. It was in a language that I really, really resonated with. And I was hooked. And I got myself a copy, and I read it all the time and began to behave more wisely, rather than my big ego trying to control things and press my way into situations that I wasn't welcome. I began to hold back, and a long lifetime of experience to kind of wear the rock down so that it can roll without making too much noise.
Wow. Wow. That's quite a start. So Fraklin, so before you encountered if I may ask, how old were you when you encountered Tao Te Ching for the first time?
In 1977, I would have been 19.
19. Okay, so that's fairly early in your life. Wow.
Yeah, and then there's this guy. This guy came in 1970, and he's one of my oldest artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
I used to keep my stash in him, so I'd hide my herb in there. And I'm an Aquarius, so this was like, a water bearer. But, I was when I encountered Lao Tzu, I just felt naturally an affinity because of the Kung Fu character and because of Charlie Chan. And, there was, and maybe some, mysterious ancient connection, that is just a speculation, but it has that ring to it.
One of the remarks that you made that kind of stuck with me is that you found this to be poetic, wise. So in some ways, it seems to be kind of more connected, more grounded than kind of imagination, which is kind of creation of your own kind of figment.
Yeah.
And you being too invested in just the fact that you have produced it, rather than kind of being open to taking in what the world is telling you, and then letting your imagination be shaped by it.
Yeah, I think you've zeroed in on something about the Tao there, because my urge, my interest in the other world, to go into the realm of the imagination and have some kind of, peak experience. I really believed that there would be a peak experience and then the whole world would smooth out and it would be an easy ride. But the Tao, when we understand the Tao, it's like it's to really be engaged with what's happening, not the imagination, not some ideal, but to be content and to recognize the just the comfort and the casualness and the carefreeness of what is simple and what is natural, and not inflated and full of heroic brouhaha.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's beautifully put, because it's kind of like accepting first, kind of listening first, and then speaking, and speaking softly and gently along the same lines
Yeah.
of what the world, the way in which the world is speaking
Yeah.
to you.
Well said.
Uh,
Yeah. The tone.
yes. Now, so folks, if you have questions, you can go ahead and keep putting in the chat. Put an exclamation mark in front of them so I can identify questions from anything else. So now let's go into Tao Te Ching. So now you've discovered this. You've seen its value. You've seen that it answers to something that you've been looking for. So it does two things. It answers the deepest thing that you wanted to do, of kind of this metaphysical vision, connecting to like the core of existence. So it answers what you're looking for, but it does it in a very different way. It does it in a more kind of gentle and grounded way and simple way than before. So how did it, what did you do with it? Did you read? Did you act in a certain way? Did you do meditation? How did you proceed after discovering Tao Te Ching?
Yeah, I was meditating sporadically from the age of 9 and doing various exercises, breathing and things that I considered like just keeping my body strong and fit and agile. Um, so there was always that going on, which not everybody was, doing that kind of stuff. A lot of people are now, more than then. Uh, so we our energy tends to rise up and excite some kind of an urge in our heart and then an urge in our head, and we run away. But where the Tao is like just right there in like a tree in the body, and there you are hanging out at the tree, and whatever's going on, it's not it's not pulling your energy out towards it. You're not like caught by it. You just kind of observe it, you gaze at it, but you stay centered in your body, in your heart, deep down the third vessel down there with the fire in it. And so the gaze is out, but there is also something that is restrained, kept consciously calm, so that instead of these getting caught, getting angry, getting excited, getting pulled away from what might be appropriate, we're learning to just sort of like just stay put and observe the impulse, but don't respond to it. And I should say, among other things, Taoism is related to an alchemical system, a spiritual, an advanced spiritual practice. And so this being aware of the energy rising up and pulling us and getting us engaged in all kinds of things that are upsetting or distracting or addictive, uh, learning to sit and not respond. This is called taming the astral body, taming the uh, things that are related to our instincts, our emotions, and our imagination. Those three things are intimately related. Instinct, emotion, and imagination are the soul, not the mind, not the spirit, not this verbal, discursive communication thing we have going on. That's the spirit, the rational mind, the scientific five senses world. Then there's this other thing going on inside that is instinctual, emotional, it's imagination. that soul begins like it's a puppy. It's a puppy that is impulsive. It wants to do everything. It's prone to being deceived. It's prone to being confused. It gets inflated, all kinds of things. And so spiritual practice makes us aware that it's there, and we try to tame this impulsiveness. And when we do that, what began as the symbol of the serpent in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, like there's right and wrong, and we keep making the wrong choices until we wise up, and then we make the right choices. Well, what's making these wrong choices is this impulsive, instinctual, emotional, imaginary experience inside that has us caught. When we tame that, now this same force, the same energy is an amazing cosmic consciousness. It's the sacred Kundalini, for example.
Mhm.
When we see a drawing of the original emperor of China, Fu Si, who found the I Ching symbols on the tortoise or the sea water monster, he and his wife have serpent bodies, so they're related to this pure conscious energy. The serpents represent energetic, like waveforms, and it's our sensory nervous system, deep, deep, ancient, instinctual. Yeah, and Chinese metaphysics would be worth mentioning that we don't hear about the underworld in Tao Te Ching, but there is something called the Fanglands, and that's where the ancestral spirits are, and it's accessed in the soul, and it's a dive in and down, and their ancestral spirits are. No, it's not unlike talking about DNA that carries, like trauma and other impressions for generations.
Franklin, let me do one thing. This is very complex. So let's go step by step. So I want to relate one of the ideas that you talked about, that we get kind of reactive.
Yeah.
We react to immediate things that are taking place. We get enthusiastic about things. We let our imagination run wild. We don't really check whether we are right or wrong. We just act on those things. So we are acting kind of in a very short range, reactive way. So for example, I want to relate it to the Indian idea, where, it is kind of like your mind, for example, I've read Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, and it's all about kind of seeing that your mind is kind of, there are these waves going on, and they are kind of reacting to the immediate things. And it's all about kind of, quietening those things so that our attention is not so much focused on reacting to the immediate thing, either from outside or inside, but quietening it to a level where you start to look at things which are persistent, both within you and outside of you. So it's kind of a phenomena of quietening. And it starts by not actually making them stop, but by being gently aware of it. And just the awareness that you're doing that allows you to calm them down, so you can see the substrate both internally and outside within that. Is that what you're referring to? Is the same kind of thing you're referring to?
Yeah. What's the word for it? Awareness. Being aware. You're not trying to control what the mind is doing. You're just becoming aware of it, as opposed to like being pulled, or like a puppy that's just running wildly after it. You're now starting to observe it, but not to control it, not to be telling stories about it. I think that's an important piece. You don't get caught in the discursive mind telling stories about this experience. You're just observing, just staying in the moment.
Yes. Excellent. So now you're saying, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you were saying then about the ancestral spirit. So what kind of a thing is that? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, this would be a metaphysic. This would be a way of imagining the universe. But I think it's important, and here's an important distinction of the Tao Te Ching, right? Most world religions, most world mythologies are about the human condition. They're about what's going on as a human being. And we have a physical body, we have an energy. It's called the etheric body. It's just the pure energy. It's like if you really charge it up, it shines like the sun. You'll dream vividly, right? Dreams will be vivid because there's more energy in the system. Then there's the astral body that I described, instinctual, emotional, imagination. And then a mental body, which is discursive. And this comes from a higher world. It is language. It is coming from a universal code. And it's downloaded into the humans. We don't know when, 400,000 years ago? Who knows? But language is this spiritual thing. And where was I going with that? Becoming aware that this complicated self, what was your question?
Okay, no, that's fine. Let's approach it another way. We will come back to this because these things are enormously difficult to talk about. Because
Yeah.
what we're talking about are kind of, alternate ways of looking at metaphysics. There are ways of kind of dividing these things. And my general approach is to kind of try to connect as many of these systems as possible so you can see the patterns that emerge. Like, Jung talks about it in a certain way. Chinese thought talks about it in a certain way. Indian thought talks about it in a certain way.
Yeah.
Bible talks about it in a certain way. And you're trying to kind of connect kind of commonalities. And I tend to take the approach of Jung and like people like Joseph Campbell or Jordan Peterson, where you're trying to combine, like trying to do, like not looking at the kind of unique things so much of a system, but seeing what things are common. So how about we do this?
The principles, right? Not the clothing, but the principles.
Yes. So
Yeah.
let's do one thing. Let's come back to Tao Te Ching, and let's continue the story that way. So let me ask you.
I remember my thought, and it's worth following, because
Please.
what I was going to distinguish was the average religions that are about the human condition, right? They're telling us something about what it is to be human, that we have this complicated emotional experience that's dreaming, that's caught in fantasies, that's just not really engaged with the world in some very clear and authentic way, but in some self-absorbed, delusional way. But the Tao is more than that. The Tao Te Ching is about the world soul also. It's very well aware of the human condition, but then it's also engaged with the soul of the world in ways that I don't know too many other world religions are looking at it that clearly or that intimately.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll come back to that, because that's like the core idea of the Tao itself, right? That's what Tao is.
Yeah.
It's the world soul. It's the way in which world functions.
Yeah.
It is the method in which the nature functions. And that is the most important thing. And all you're trying to do is to act in accordance with that. Now, Fraklin, I've been studying Tao Te Ching for 4 weeks. You've been studying it for 44 years. So that's 500 times more. Okay. Now, my understanding is very limited. Okay. And I'm sure I'm talking for many of my friends here whose understanding is also very limited. Okay. And so let me describe to you the experience that I have in looking at Tao Te Ching. And what I'm hoping to do is that you've had the same experience over 500 times, like 44 years. And I'm trying to look at my experience. And then I want to talk to you about what does that look like? What the same kind of similar pattern looks like over when you extend it 500 times, okay, to 44 years, okay? So let me tell you what it is to me, okay? It is at once enormously inspiring and enormously difficult at the same time, because in some ways it is very simple. It's very easy. I get it. I get what it is trying to say. I feel it. Okay. But at the same time, it seems, it is very metaphorical, and I know I'm missing a lot. I'm getting something, and I'm happy I'm getting something. But I know that there is tremendous richness. And there are these levels. There are so many things between me and the book. There is the time difference. This is 500 BC. There is the culture difference. This is the Chinese culture. There is the script difference. So it's just a different way of thinking. And even when I read multiple translations, I find that all the translators are interpreting it, and it's like different. So it is like a jigsaw puzzle. I get pieces. I am very, very excited about the pieces, but I feel that I'm still trying to explore. So that's my experience in a short time. So what has been your experience? If you wanted to look at the entire 44 years, what has been your kind of dialogue? Or see, I like the concept of dialogue. You're actually talking to the book. You're trying to listen to it. You're trying to say, oh, this is what I think you are. And then it is kind of telling you, yes, up to a point, but not really up to this point, something like that. So what has been your dialogue? What has been your conversation with this book?
The aphorisms become old friends. You open them up and you find one, and it's like an old friend. And because of its integrity and virtue, poetic brilliance, it's sublime. And whenever I run into a situation, and I've had more than my share of situations when I could remember not to bite the hook, not to get swept into some brouhaha, because I was able to remember the Tao, to remember that, the getting into controversy, getting into conflict, getting into demanding my way is like a sure way of failing, a sure way of just making things worse. So the Tao is, a sublime teacher and reminder, like, oh, let it go, relax. Just don't get caught. Don't bite the hook.
I like your way of describing it. I think metaphors is a very good way of describing it. It's, old friend,
Yeah.
a sublime teacher.
Yeah.
And we'll come up with more as we go along.
I think it might be that Lao, like, is Tao a big uh, institution, or is it like the different elucidators of the Tao are like different schools? Like you go to martial arts, and each dojo has its teacher, and they all have certain emphasis on this, that, or the other thing. And it may be that, with Lao Tzu, we're just talking about a an avatar, somebody who was in the world, so fully embodied enlightenment, and gave us this treasure chest of gems. Any one of them we can hold in our heart, and it's precious. It will get us through things better than, a lot of money. These are precious gems for the soul, for the um, just getting through the worst of times in the best of ways without getting caught in suffering so much.
Wonderful. I like that metaphor of precious gems as well. Something, and it's like, and it is gems. So it's not one gem. It's like the way in which it seems to carry on with these 81 poems is that it is putting together so many different things, and they are speaking to you from so many different angles. It's not like a discourse where it's not an argument. It's not a sequential argument. It's a parallel presentation. So,
And it's different than religions. You know, most religions have a certain, what's the word, a formal, some, well, let's call them rules and um, uh, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, that it's about the human condition. You know, like they're more or less not engaged with nature as much as the human soul. You know, they're trying to help us deal with this human soul thing, imagination, emotion, instinct, and but with the Tao, it's 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 pointing back to nature, and nature is the mirror of eternity. You know, so there's that. Plato said that nature is the mirror of eternity. Now, is eternity a duration? I don't think eternity is a duration. Eternity is the whole, and you don't experience it over time, right? You get it when the Tao makes itself felt and known, even if it's just a glimpse from, you know, afar. The pressure, I don't know there's no word for it, but the reality of it, you know, is just, wow, you've tasted eternity. You know, you're mortal, I'm mortal, but you get a little taste of eternity. Wow, it's real.
You use the word whole. I think that's a concept that keeps coming up in Tao Te Ching. It's all about, you know, our attention gets focused on parts, and we give those parts an undue importance, while it's like figure and ground. Because our attention is focused on that, we forget the rest of the things that are all around it that is making that possible. So a lot of the emphasis seems to be to keep going back to the whole, keep going back to the whole. Remember that we are human, so we are going to focus on the parts. And it's a way of kind of stepping back and getting back to the whole relentlessly. That seems to be what it is trying to do.
And,
Does that make sense?
and there's poetry, right? Now, we can use words and we can use our rational mind. And, you know, I could talk about the physics of Tao, the dancing woolly masters, the Tao of physics, you know, great intellectual books that are using the universal language of mathematics to describe how the universe is tensions, opposite forces, and interconnected layers of these creating the whole universe. But the Tao, right? Language wants to be, the essential language is poetry, you know. Now I'm thinking of a Celtic myth, Taliesin, the archetype of the lineage of the Celtic wizards. You know, Taliesin is shaman poet, and poet is the key. Now we can talk about the Tao, the nine hazels of poetry from the well of sages, where the salmon of wisdom feed on the nine hazels of poetry. So now language can begin to touch upon the enormous, unspeakable receptiveness of the Tao, right? The valley of the mother nature and the power of the thunder sky and these forces that are giving rise to you know, colonies of all beings that are just in a communication, that are speaking a language themselves. Everything is speaking. The whole universe is vibrating the songs of creation, you know. So that's a little taste of poetry, right? It's not a scientific explanation. It's not using numbers and facts in a dry tone.
Wonderful, wonderfully put. So I want to now start incorporating questions that have come in. So one of the questions is about translation. So what has been, I mean, that is, that's something that I've worked on. I'm trying to work on. So what have you found out about, how have you used translations of Tao Te Ching, and how have you gone through multiple translations? How have you chosen translations? What do translations add to your study? So can you speak a little bit about the translations of the Tao?
I can only speak a little bit. I'm searching for Richard Wilhelm because he is so highly regarded as a Chinese translator, and because he brought the I Ching, a sublime edition of the I Ching with masterful translation. So I'm really curious to read Richard Wilhelm. And I'm not, Legs James Legg did the I Ching, and I wasn't crazy about his I Ching, but I see he's done the Tao Te Ching, and I think it's really valuable. And I agree with you. I've heard you talk about like every translation has a different flavor, a different perspective. The authors and translators are bringing something unique, something of their own background to it. And so we can find something there, in every translation, there's something there.
So Fraklin, what we're going to do is we'll do a full meetup on this. I'm planning a full meetup on this Saturday at 12 o'clock. What we will do is that, all of you, everybody is welcome to talk about translation. So we're going to talk about how do you use all these translations as interpretations of Tao Te Ching. So we will choose some poems, and then we will look at multiple translations. Everybody gets to read whatever translations. And then let's have a dialogue about these multiple translations and see what we can figure out. And we'll do that for like 3 or 4 poems, many, many translations, to see what we can learn from translations.
And let's remember that you have invited us, encouraged us, prompted us to do our own translations. And that would be the most enjoyable, is if people come with their translations. I would be thrilled.
Yes, so this is going to be on Saturday at 12 o'clock. So come with your translations, whatever translations speak to you. And we will vote for the poems we want to focus on. We will choose ones which many people are interested in. We'll choose several of those. And let's read many translations. And then let's talk about all the translations, because as Fraklin was saying, this is poetry. And translations are, though they try to be poetry, it's different person's poetry. A great poet, it's very difficult to translate a great poet. You kind of have to be somebody of that caliber in order to actually make that sing. So most people are able to make it sing only up to a point. And hopefully by taking all these chorus of songs, we may be able to understand the song a little bit better. So that's what we're going to do. So what I want to do is